Okay, hi everyone. I'm Shawn, and I'm here with Cristin Raven. She is a counselor at Outreach, and she's also a professional art therapist. And so she is on with us today. We're going to talk about risks of isolation related to the pandemic. So, hey, Cristin, thanks for being on.
Hi, Sean. Good to be here.
All right, thanks.
I guess we have some questions. There's risk of isolation has been a big issue for us here at our school too, and I think it's a part of like our whole district and probably the globe.
Yeah,
One of the
yeah.
questions that keeps coming up is what kinds of mental health risks are out there right now for students in particular during the pandemic?
Yeah, and there's a number that we're seeing in general that are going on during the pandemic. There's a lot of isolation that's happening, and for some students, that at least at first wasn't a bad thing at all. I'm the parent of an introvert who really doesn't mind doing a fair bit of homeschooling, and that's not something that's a bad thing for her. But even so, even for those of us who are a bit more on the introverted side of the spectrum, we still need that interaction, that ability to be able to connect with people. And when we don't get that, then we're just missing out. For our kids, we're missing out on that opportunity to build and develop those social skills that we know are
Yeah.
really crucial for them, as well as the friendships that they need. And so, if it's a concern for our kids that are more on the introverted side, it's a big concern for those that are extroverted who really crave that attention, that those interactions with people where they build energy, drive energy from that. So with that, there's a when we lose out on something that's fun for us to do, we're at greater risk for problems with mood and depression. One of the ways that I kind of see the pandemic is that if we think of the degree of mental health challenges that are out there in the community, and let's say that in general they're about right here, and then the level that would suggest that you're at a real problem area where you need to get that professional support, let's say that's here. And some folks would already have been here before the pandemic. For all of
Right.
us, our level has been boosted up a bit. So for some people, it boosted up to above here. And for some people, it just went from really good to not quite so good. But I think for all of us, it's had an impact in some way. So I think
Our
that
baseline has changed.
our
That's
baseline
a
has really changed, and I'm hopeful that that goes back as the pandemic starts to lift. Some of the worry that I'd seen from research around the 1918 pandemic, a century ago, was that mental health seemed to decline right after that. So we really want to be vigilant as we're coming out of this summer and things are getting back to normal, that we're able to find back those skills that we had and the resilience strategies that we had
yeah,
too. So, what kinds
yeah.
of things are you seeing with your students there?
Lots of avoidance,
Hmm.
just a ton of avoidance and uptick in anxiety. And that leads to my next question is like, how has anxiety been affected during the pandemic? I think that baseline that you were talking about, for sure, I've seen that in this building. The average kiddo who just has normal worries it's now elevated into, pandemic level worries. And then the people around them. So their families, their grandparents, friends, parents, that kind of thing.
We have so much stress in so many different ways with the pandemic. So there's been worries about the obvious worry is the health concerns for ourselves, but also health concerns for our kids, for our parents, our extended family, our friends. Worries about a whole lot of different people. Most of us, I think, at this point, know of someone, if we haven't experienced ourselves, someone who has gotten COVID, and so that's something that we know is a real thing, and it's scary because it's a risk for all of us. It's like for our younger kids that are, when we think about zones of regulation. So we have just a real quickie overview of it. uh, there are four zones that we all are naturally in. And this is really useful, I think, for younger kids who don't have all of that emotional language yet. There's the green zone where everything is chill, I'm doing well and feeling good, feeling rested. There's the yellow zone where I'm a little bit heightened, maybe I'm irritable or a little bit excited. And then there's the red zone, which is the level where we're freaking out, we're not able to process things very well, or extremely excited. If you win the lottery, by the way, you'll be in the red zone. So what the zones mean to me is how well are you able to solve problems and figure things out. So because even if you're having a totally awesome day, you may have difficulty with trying to solve problems. If you win the lottery and then I get you to do some algebra, you're not going to do it as well as you otherwise would. And that's really normal. So for all of us, when we're experiencing things where we're out of the green zone, and then the other one is kind of on the bottom of the green zone, would be the blue zone, which is where we're just sad or mopey, don't have a lot of energy, or tired. And for any of these, the further we are away from the green zone, the harder it is for us to be able to process and to problem solve in the best way. And so I feel like with this pandemic, we've just spent a whole lot of time stuck in the yellow zone. I'm generally
Yeah.
not freaked out about it, but it's sort of in the back of my mind in terms of these different worries. So there's the health worries, there
Yeah.
are the financial worries, which are very real for lots of people. The worry is the government doing things right related to this? Some people think that the restrictions are not strong enough. Some people think the restrictions are too strong.
Yeah.
It's very hard to know exactly what the right spot is. So we have this kind of society overlay of anxiety that's happening for all of us now that makes
Yeah.
it hard. And this rubs off on our kids, whether they watch the news or whether they just talk with other people or whether they're isolated on their own and not connected with a lot of this, a lot of different ways for anxiety to come about. So
Yeah.
I think it really depends for each of us. The degree of extra anxiety has to do with our own personal makeup and how well we were doing before the pandemic began. If we can think of the before times and what that was like.
Yeah.
At that time, I remember us talking as a district around this seemed to be an epidemic of anxiety that was already going on. We're already
Yeah.
aware of this for our kids, and now we have this worldwide event that's affected everybody.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
it's a big
I
thing.
see it as like wearing a thin, scratchy sweater. You've got this extra layer on and it's irritating all the time and you can't take it off. And
Mhm.
some people have more layers and more layers, right? Financial, physical concerns. And everyone's wearing the pandemic sweater, right? It's always this itchy irritation all the time. Which brings me to the next question. How has attendance been affected by the anxiety? I know that we see it in our building where that because of this anxiety of this itchy sweater that people can't take off,
Mhm.
they just get exhausted and shut down. And I think you're right. It's the capacity is different for everybody, depending on the before times. But what have you noticed or seen, Shawn?
Well, it's this risk with when we're feeling anxious. What our tendency is to avoid the thing that causes anxiety, and this is really normal because anxiety sucks. So we want to we want to avoid it, and
Yeah,
so when I do things that will decrease my anxiety, this makes me feel better in the immediate term, but it doesn't help me to have resiliency strategies in the long term. And so this is
right.
an easy trap to fall into where a child is feeling anxious and not wanting to go to school, and the parent says, well, why don't we just give you the day off? And sometimes that works where you get a day off and then you feel a bit more rejuvenated, you're ready to go for tomorrow. But sometimes it doesn't, and it makes tomorrow twice as difficult. And it's easy for parents to get really painted into a corner with this, where the child isn't confronting the anxiety and managing it. We know that for many kids, they don't like going to school, just as many adults don't really like going to work. But often, once you're there, it feels a lot better once you get there. And so it's getting over that inside the building that's a really important thing, because you are going to experience some anxiety there. It's easiest for me if I just sit on my couch and do nothing all day. Then I know I'm not going to experience any anxiety as long as I don't watch the news. But I can
Yeah,
avoid anxiety really effectively, but then I'm not growing. I'm not making new friends. I'm not doing challenging things in my work. I'm not doing things that are really building up my capacity.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
where that attendance comes in, I think, is that when we have kids that have spent time, spent a quarter or two or three or four out of school, it's not necessarily that that's a bad thing. And that really depends on, for each family, what the risks are within the family. And so I know as a district, we've been really careful about what parents choose is what parents are going to choose, and they know what's best in their family. And I think
absolutely.
that's been really cool that we've been open to that. But I'm worried a bit about when kids go back for, say, the fourth quarter and they've been away for a while, or when they start back up in the fall. How do we set them up for success, knowing that that anxiety is really gonna
Yeah.
spike up?
And I always see it as like in ways of how to work on these areas. I always see anxiety is a really having this imaginative brain that you can imagine the worst case scenarios. That's really our brains function to keep us alive and safe. And if you can imagine the worst case scenarios, you also have the superpower to also imagine neutral scenarios or even, optimal or positive scenarios, which I think
Yeah.
is also one of those skill building capacities. Yeah.
I think that's a terrific way of describing it, because you have our brains we want to protect ourselves, and
Mhm.
that's normal and that's a healthy thing. But we tend then to focus on the negative or the worst possible
Yeah,
outcome, and it's important to make sure that we give that some space in our brain, but we don't give it all the space in our brain. That we want it to share with what's most likely to happen or what's the best thing that could happen, because
totally.
these are all
Yeah.
important things.
Yeah. And in terms of the pandemic, we need to be considering things like wearing masks and staying distant and
Hmm.
being outdoors when we visit. Like all of those things are in our capacity, but then quelling some of the worst case scenarios from there, addressing the real concerns, and then looking at neutral outcomes
For
or
sure, for
optimal.
sure. Knowing that life is risky inherently. There's the people slip in the bathtub. We endure risks every day that we don't necessarily think about. The classic example of that is when you take a flight. This is pre-COVID, but
Yeah,
the riskiest part of taking the flight was actually getting in the car to go to the airport. It's not being on the
absolutely.
plane. But I don't have any
Yeah,
anxiety about hopping in my car, whereas I have a little bit about getting on the plane, getting into
yeah,
this hunk of metal that's somehow going to fly through the sky. Somehow this magically works out. So I
yeah,
think some of the takeaway for managing anxiety with our kids is making sure that they're doing things that are healthy, that they're doing things that are good, healthy choices that that just help them generally feel better. Making sure they're staying engaged with friends, doing some physical activity is important, and also having some ways of just challenging them out of their comfort zone. It's been really easy for us to just focus on our time in front of the computer. Again,
yeah.
there's not a lot of anxiety that necessarily can go about with that. If I can play, I can play Tetris or Bejeweled or something else like that shows off my age. That I can do this for hours, and it's not anxiety provoking. But then afterwards, you have that sort of gross feeling of, ooh, that's 3 hours of my life I'll never get back. And so
Yeah.
making sure that we have that balance of screen time and just plain old downtime, which is okay, but where we're doing things where we are nudging ourselves and nudging our kids a bit as
Absolutely.
well. So
And in terms of anxious people, I think giving them lots of choice, it gives them some sense of confidence and control. So having choice within those alternate activities that are a little more outdoor engaging, that kind of thing, for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
for all of us, we like to have options
Yeah.
of things to do. And for each individual kid, it depends on what their personality is like as far as how do we set up those choices. Some people do well with a smorgasbord of 20 options. Some kids do best with two. Make it simple.
I
Yeah.
agree.
So we're sharing a brain here. But giving them some option is always a nice strategy to do.
Yeah,
There's lots of
exactly.
ways to do physical activity. You can walk, you can run, you can, well, a month ago you could
Play,
ski. Yeah.
play a game. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I agree.
all right. Awesome. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, it was good to see you, Shawn.
Great.
Thank
Talk to you
you.
soon, Cristin.
Okay, bye.
Bye.